Okay, we're going to be getting started here in just a minute. Okay, we're going to be doing things a little bit differently today than we normally do. Today, I'm going to be preparing for a talk I'm giving tonight at the Hawaii iOS Developers Meetup. And the topic is Architecture 101. And so what we're going to be doing today is I've created an app that has really poor architecture. And we're going to go ahead and take a crack at starting to fix it. So we'll pull down a new version of it. It's at my GitHub, so github.com/AdamOnTheRun/bad-architecture. Okay. We'll work from the master branch here. Okay. Yeah, so one thing that's a little bit different with Xcode that I've realized is that when you're working with your when you're working over here in your file browser, oh great, okay, that's fixed, good. So when you're adding new folders and you're adding things to folders, you actually can create physical folders on your drive now. You can create directories. So new group without folder basically just adds things with relative paths in your library over here. New group from selection full on adds a new folder. And that had kind of screwed me up a little bit before. So let's take a look at what we're going to be working with. The starter app is very, very basic. Let's make sure it builds. Of course. Let's try cleaning it, doing a little incantation. Oh no. Hopefully we don't crash today. I had a crash yesterday that's really screwed things up. Okay. So it's a very simple app, as I said. So it's a table view that goes out to the to Apple's iTunes API, and it downloads. It searches for basically Game of Thrones, and it downloads a bunch of tracks that are returned for the search term Game of Thrones, and we put the basic information we get back into a table view. So there's an image, there's a episode title, there's an episode name, and something else. So we'll look how it all works. I'll give you a very quick tour of the app before we get started doing some fixes. I'm not sure how far we'll get today. App delegate is nice and clean, nothing special there. The storyboard itself is very simple as well. There is a tracks table view controller, which some of this stuff I'm not even using. So I'm just going to kill it right now. I was going to make it a little more complicated, then I realized that I'm just kind of going overboard. And we don't even really need to wrap it in the nav controller, so let's kill that just to simplify. I really want to focus on what's important here. Okay, so we have a tracks table view controller that is our initial view controller. There are 3 labels, all with outlets, and an image view. And these are all wrapped up in some stack views. I mean, nothing fancy. I'm not here focusing on layout. So let's take a look at tracks table view controller. And this drives me insane, but this is the point of the exercise, okay? So it is a subclass of UI table view controller with a data source of an array of dictionary items of type string any. It's empty when we start up. After view did load, we create a data task with this hard-coded string, which goes out to the iTunes API, and it just searches for term Game of Thrones. And then in the completion handler, we get back some data, a response, and an error. We force cast the JSON so we forced try the JSON serialization of the data. And we are forced downcasting it to type string any. And then we are saying tracks equals the results of the JSON, the results key that comes back, and we're force casting that to an array of type string any. And then we're just appending that array of dictionary items to tracks. And then to get that, so we're on a background thread here, so then we jump back to the main thread. We tell the table view to reload data. Data task.resume. So clearly this is not good, right? And this is like almost a little comical in how bad it is, but all of these mistakes or all of these errors are things that I have seen before in the wild. Either on apps that I've worked on or code reviews, or more commonly than anything, the problem is you'll see things like this in tutorials, right? You'll see like the Ray Wenderlichs of the world are trying to focus on the stuff that they're teaching, which just totally makes sense. I did the same thing. And instead of good architecture, you just kind of blast things out there to get it in. But then people will take those, you play how you practice, right? So people will go ahead and they'll do the same sort of mistakes when they're actually building apps as when they're doing tutorials. So to continue on, we just have some very simple data source methods. We've got one section. The number of rows in the section is just the number of tracks. And then in self-row and index path down here, we just have some more bad practices. We have some stringly type stuff here. Again, we have some more force casting. And then we are, instead of working with the model object, we're just working with a dictionary of type string any. And we are building up the track URL, which is the artwork URL. We're getting image data, and we're full on synchronously loading it in a table view, so this makes for a very kind of jerky experience. So we're getting the image data synchronously right here. Then we're updating that image view that we saw earlier, and then we're setting the track name, artist name, and collection name labels based off of these stringly coded keys from the dictionary, and we're returning the cell. And the cell itself is just a bunch of outlets to the storyboard. So the cell doesn't really have any knowledge of how to draw itself, how to render itself. So there's a bunch of problems. We can quickly talk about them. It's hard, right? Because there's so much going on. And we're not going to try to do every single best practice. We're going to try to take a look at some of the architectural things that we can help fix. So a view controller, and a lot of it is single responsibility principle, right? So that's what we're going to be primarily focused on. A view controller should not know anything about a data task. It's not its job to do networking. It shouldn't know about JSON. It doesn't care about JSON. It doesn't care about the format in which the data is coming from. So we need to move these things out to a structure that knows how and should know how to deal with these things, and just call out to them. We should not be using dictionaries with stringly typed keys for our model. We should actually have a proper model, and we should be encoding those models somewhere else. We shouldn't have to know that there is literally a key called artwork URL 100 in Apple's API. So we're going to be abstracting that as well. We should not be blocking the main thread. We should be doing something asynchronous here to get the track image, basically. And certainly the view controller should not have to know how this is happening. And then it's also not the view controller's job to be setting all of these IBLit properties on, on the cell. We should be passing in, we should let the cell figure out how to draw itself. Now there's certainly other things, and there's a lot to argue about here too, right? Like people believe in different architectures. There's lots of different things that you can argue one way or the other, but this is my take on it, and these are what I consider to be some best practices. And we're going to get started, and we'll just see how far we can get. So to me, one of the kind of obvious wins is we know we're going to have a model object. So let's get started with that. We'll create a struct of type track because we want to be showing a Game of Thrones track in our table view. And we're going to make it a struct because it doesn't, at this point, we want to keep it as simple of a data type as possible. And it can be a value type because we don't need to conform to NSObject right now. If we need to, we can come back and change it later on. So we'll call it a track. And then we know that there's a name, a track name, an artist name, a collection name, and a cover art image. I won't make you guys watch me type that out because I just did it a few minutes ago. So this is going to have to be UI kit. And so these are all value types. There's one thing you have to kind of keep in mind, which is a little ugly, and I never really have the great solution for this. We do have a UI image, which is not a value type, it's a reference type, as a property of our value type. So there could be some weird immutability things that could potentially happen, so kind of flag that. But now we have a struct called track. Now, if the app got a little more complex, I could easily see making more model objects for things like you could have artists, we could have collections, but right now it's pretty simple. It doesn't call for it, and we know how we could come back and we could make more model types and then just add references to them here. For now, we're going to keep it kind of simple. So we'll structure this. Let's do a little bit more housekeeping here. Let's move our view controller and cell up into the UI class, and we'll say new group from selection, and we'll just put this in a view controller. I like to keep this kind of stuff pretty organized, and we'll call this one cells. Ah, crap. That was not right. Sorry, getting ahead of myself. Okay, so now our UI is kind of bundled up nicely there. Let's add a models folder. Okay, so now let's go back to our nasty view controller. Okay, the next thing I want to do is I want the networking to be out of here. So let's make a networking folder. And we're going to make a tracks fetcher. So in our model, I'm going to create a track. Oh, well, okay, let's do this first. Tracks fetcher. A tracks fetcher is an object that knows how to fetch tracks. Now, what's nice about this architecture is that it's going to return an array of tracks, or it's going to return an error. We don't want it to return both of those two things, so we're going to go with something called the result pattern. So we're going to make another thing called a result. And this is something that I use in almost all of my projects nowadays. So what this means is it is a type that accepts a generic, and it's an enum, and it can have either a success or a failure. So you can't get into one of these weird states where you both return success with a bunch of JSON data or a bunch of model objects, and you return an error, and then you just don't know what to do. It's got to be one or the other. So it's a success of type T, meaning whatever type you're trying to return, or something that conforms to the error protocol. So let's go back to our tracks fetcher. And since this is going to be an asynchronous operation, we're going to make a type alias, and it's going to be tracks completion handler. And that's going to be of type results. And it's going to be an array of tracks. All right. So enum tracks fetcher. And we're going to have a simple static method, fetch all. Okay, so let's talk about a couple things here. The reason that this is an enum, and so the reason it's a value type is that we're going to get the benefits of being a value type, right? There's no concerns about mutability or anything like that. And the reason I choose enum over struct is kind of a subtle one, and it's not a huge deal, but it's worth talking about. I choose enum because I don't want this class to ever be instantiated. I want it to be just static methods that are kind of ephemeral, and when it's done, it's done. You don't have to worry about anything to do with memory or retain cycles. So making it an enum means that you can never instantiate it. So there's just a little bit of a safety check for you or other developers on your team. And there's no real drawbacks to it. So that's why I use enum for this type of thing. The reason I don't want to instantiate it is that if you want to do things like if you want to get to be able to cancel it properly, or you want to be able to handle multiple requests via the same object, then you're going to want to instantiate something. You're going to want to either make it a struct or a class. But we don't really have a requirement to do that right now, so we're going to keep it really simple and make it an enum. So it's not going to return anything, and it's going to have a completion handler. It doesn't take any parameters, and it's going to have a tracks completion handler. Now, one other thing to realize about a tracks fetcher is that a tracks fetcher doesn't, when you're calling it, you don't have any idea where it's getting its tracks from, right? You don't know if it's a JSON source, an XML source, a local source. You, as the view controller, you as the caller, are trusting the tracks fetcher to have that knowledge about where a track should be pulled from. And all you're saying is, give me those tracks. All right. Now, the tracks fetcher in this case is going to have that knowledge. All right, and it knows that when fetch all gets called, it needs to talk to the JSON web service. So let's add our first networking call up here. So we're going to have a tracks JSON service. So a service that will get tracks in JSON form. Looks like we crashed. Let's see if we can fix that. This is I'm working off the beta, so it's kind of crashy. Okay, here we go. Sorry about that, guys. We're back. Okay, so just picking up where we left off, we have this generic tracks fetcher, and it's going to know to call out to the tracks JSON service. And it's going to know to return. It's also going to be a asynchronous call, and its type handler is going to be tracks JSON completion handler, because its job is to pass back JSON to its caller. It doesn't really know anything about tracks themselves. So it's going to pass back, again, this result pattern and it knows that this is supposed to be multiple tracks, so it's going to pass back an array of type any. So again, an enum, tracks JSON service, and we're going to say static func fetch all. Again, not taking any parameters. So let's go back to our original call that was made in the view controller. So we can see a couple things here. We are using the shared URL session data task to get our data task here, configuring it with a URL, and then we're doing a bunch of things here. We are getting the JSON by using this JSON serialization method, and then turning it into tracks so we can extract some of this stuff. So we're going to want to do some, but not all of this. We'll just copy it for now. We won't be doing any dispatching. Well, that's something, I guess, to think about. And we won't be worrying about this. All right, so let's think this over for a minute. Now, right now, since we don't have, this is a very, very simple app. We're not going to be over-architecting this thing. Let's create, just to keep it simpler, let's create a geo game. I won't assume you guys know what I'm talking about, but I know you all watch it. Game of Thrones, URL. And then this returns an optional. Yeah. So let's guard. Let's start doing a couple better practices. Guard let Game of Thrones URL else. And where's our closing block? Okay. We'll start off by printing. There's a problem with the URL and returning. But let's think this over a little bit more carefully. So if there's a problem with this URL, we want to still be calling the completion handler, but we want to be passing in the error. So we're going to need to create some kind of an error. So let's do that real quick too. We'll put that in supporting. We'll call it a track error. We'll make sure that it conforms to error. track error conforms to error. And for now, let's just keep it really simple. Let's just literally have a couple cases like bad URL. And we'll, we can do, there's lots more you can do here, but just to keep it simple, we're just going to create a bad URL case for the track error. So instead of, well, we can solve the print, whatever. We can say completion handler. Oh, yeah, we need the completion handler. Okay. We need to have a completion handler here. Duh. Completion handler, escaping. Tracks, JSON, completion handler. Can't call it unless we add it as a parameter. So let's call completion handler results failure, and we'll pass in our error. So that's going to be our track error dot bad URL. Okay, so let's talk about this real quick. We are creating our Game of Thrones URL, hard-coded for now, whatever. I mean, obviously not a best practice, but that's not what we're focusing on right at this minute. We're gonna return the completion handler with a failure state saying there's a bad URL. Whoops, okay. Now, we've got our URL, so we can update that here. We don't have to force cast it anymore. We're not going to get a crash if anything goes wrong. Game of Thrones URL. So we got data, a response, and an error back. And if we were building a full-on application, we'd want to be handling error cases and looking at the response that came back, and then checking the data as well. We'll see what we can get to. First, I guess we can say if let error equals error, so there is an error. Then we'll just call a completion handler result dot failure. And then it looks like we'll need another case here. So we'll say bad data. Bad data or error from API. Whatever, that's fine. Track error dot bad URL. Oh no. Dot error from API. There we go. And we'll return. Oh yeah. We're not going to use. Oh. So that's kind of a debate. Like, we have this error. Do we want to just pass it back, or do we want to pass back our own? If I was doing this for real, I would take a look at this error and I might map it to our track error. That could be kind of a to-do. Map this NS URL session error to my custom error. Okay, so now we get back some data, but our job is to pass back an array of any. So basically, we want to pass back an array of JSON. So let's now start working on that. Maybe we should do, well, okay, this is something I would certainly want to do in a helper method, so whatever, let's do it in a helper method. Private func munge, wait, transform data underscore, and we'll pass over the completion handler. Tracks JSON completion handler. Yes. Okay. Now, we'll say transform okay, so yeah, okay. Oh, because it's static. That's something that screws me up all the time when I make private helper methods. Okay, private static func. Sorry about that. These are all static. Okay. Let's try that again. Private transform our data, which is an optional, so we're gonna have to handle that. And our completion handler. Okay. If let. So basically, if guard let data equal data, else whatever. We'll just call this. We'd want a special error case for this too, but for now, whatever, we will pass the same error completion handler if there's no data. So now we know that there's some data. And let's get rid of this guy because we got a helper method. Okay, so our goal here is to now transform this data into JSON into the tracks part of the JSON, and then call the completion handler. If there's an error, we'll pass the error. So this doesn't have to be force casted anymore. Guard let JSON. Okay. Okay, we're going to need one more new, let's say, bad data, because we weren't able to transform it from data to JSON. That's the case we want to handle right here. Okay, so in this case, we're going to say completion handler result failure, track error, and then we're going to say bad data this time, because if we're getting into the else block here, it means that our try of turning this data into JSON failed. So we want to say there's bad data. And so that gives us some data. So I think now is a good point to check out where we're at. All right, in order to do that, we're going to need to call through from the tracks fetcher to the tracks JSON service. So we will say tracks JSON service, tracks JSON service dot fetch with this completion handler. We're just going to go back into that tracks JSON service. So for now, we'll just okay. So now we need to call the tracks fetcher from our view controller. So let's get rid of all this and tracks fetcher dot fetch all. Okay, so let's put a breakpoint over here, and we'll say print tracks. And, oh, sorry, print JSON. And we'll set a breakpoint here. Okay, let's see what happens. Let's see if we screw anything up. Okay, so it looks like it called through from our viewDid load to our fetch all. And we're going to transform our data, and let's make sure we got what we're looking for. Results. And there's a bunch of track information here, so great. So let's see if we can load up tracks. Tracks has 50 values. It is an array of dictionary string any. And each one of these tracks has a bunch of keys and values. Perfect. Okay, so this is what we're looking for. So now this thing, this tracks JSON service, it has the knowledge. It has a little bit of, here's got a couple pieces of knowledge in it. And I could probably think of arguments for breaking this out a little bit more, especially in a more sophisticated scenario. We might want to, of course, you know, in a real app, you'd have a parameter here where you'd probably pass in a term or something. And you might also have a helper class or a helper object that knew how to take this full JSON payload and transform that into an array of string any that has the tracks. But for now, we're just going to bake that knowledge into this class, and we're going to say tracks equals JSON sub results. Okay, well, actually, here's another good place for a guard. We want to get rid of all this force casting, so we'll say guard let tracks equal JSON as type array of string any else. And again, we'll do, we can probably just copy this. We'll just call this bad data. Because the data wasn't able to be transformed into the format that we're looking for. So we have a lot of ways to bail early here. If, again, if there's an error returned, if the data was nil, if the JSON serializer could not work, and if the expected tracks weren't there, all those times we bail early. And finally, if all those work, then we're going to pass in our completion handler. We're finally going to have a success, result.success, and we're going to pass in tracks, and that conforms to our type alias up here. Oh, no, it doesn't. Or does it? 50 values. Yeah, it's an array. It should work. Okay, sweet. Continuing on. If anyone has any questions, sorry, I'm not really paying attention, but if you have any questions, just feel free to type them in the comments box. I will be more than happy to stop if I notice. Okay, all right, back to it. So this now returns, this JSON service now returns to the track fetcher, to here. So actually, we should be able to print our results here. Let's just see, let's just make sure this gets hit. And it did, so we make it there, and what do we get? Cool. We get our result. We can test, let's do one test where we're gonna force an error. And let's just put something wacky in here. This should, let's double check, but this should get caught here. Error from API. Cool. I don't know why this didn't get caught, but I guess this is pretty liberal. I guess this allows a lot of things to go through. Returns nil if the URL cannot be formed. Oh. Okay, whatever. So we can, but that's, we're catching that here, so no problem. Okay, so now let's handle this, right? So we have our tracks fetcher, which again knows that it needs to be calling out to our JSON service, and it's this tracks fetcher's job to be able to return this JSON as an array of model objects. So we're going to create a helper method that is going to go ahead and help us transform JSON into tracks. So let's go add another class here in models. Let's see, how do we want to handle this? Let's go with okay, we're going to make a JSON transformer class. So we're going to go ahead and say tracks JSON transformer. So this thing's job is going to be to transform JSON into tracks. Again, we're going to make an enum for the same reason, as I never want this thing to be instantiated. So first we'll do it for a single case, and then we'll do it for an array of tracks. So we're going to make a static method, and we're going to say a track from JSON. And so from a dictionary of type string any, we're going to return back an optional, because you know it could screw up, an optional track. Okay, now this, we're not going to have time to get into it now, but this is a great opportunity for unit tests. This is exactly the kind of stuff you want to be unit testing. So you might want to even do TDD on this. You might want to fire it up and just go through the full TDD process so that we can talk about it at some point. Let's see, what are our types? Let's bring that up in the side window. Our goal is to return a track or to return nil. There's a couple options here. You could make this throwing, and you could throw an error. For me, there's no real reason to do that right now, primarily because if it's nil, that's all the information I need, and it's pretty much because something screwed up. So now we have some of that knowledge of how to do this right now in our view controller, and essentially that is here. Track URL, track image data. Okay, let's start with the label stuff first because that's pretty easy. Okay, so now we're gonna basically say guard we want to guard that all of these things so guard let name equal. If any of these things fail, we're going to say we have to bail and return nil. So let artist name equal collection name equal else. For now, we're just going to return nil. And then if we have, okay, so what I'm thinking is instead of a UI image, we're actually going to return a URL for cover art image. And that helps us in a couple ways. Again, that is now a value type as opposed to a reference type. So that's going to help with mutability. And it's going to help us simply parse the model over here. So let's continue on with that. So that means we need to pull the string out and then transform it into a URL. This is the parts we're going to need. And we're not going to forecast that. We're going to make that optional. Okay, so let's take a look at what we got here. We're basically saying, still kind of, there's never a perfect way to format your guards, but this is the way that I've chosen to do it. I'm saying let's make sure we have a name, an artist name, a collection name, and a track URL. And if we don't, if any of those things are missing, we're just going to bail, return nil. And if they all are, if they're all there, then we're just going to return a track name, artist name, collection name, and what? Oh, I guess it didn't pick that up. Track. This isn't a track URL. This is a track cover art URL. Okay, so that's how you create a single track from a dictionary that has been passed back to us. And that's not exactly what we want. We want to be able, sorry, that's Lila going a little nuts up there. We want to be able to pass back an array of tracks. So we're going to say static func tracks from JSON, and that's going to be an array of type any, and it's going to return back an array of tracks. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to return we'll do a flat map here. JSON dot flat map, and all we have to say is track from JSON, first element, and we'll just downcast it here as type string any. Oh, right. Okay, I know what I can do here. We can accept an optional here. And we can just check here. Here's what we'll do our check to make sure that JSON's not null. Let JSON equal JSON. So that way, if the JSON is null, we'll bail here, and that way it makes it easy. We can just have an optional downcast here, and now we can make this method private. And whenever you want to limit the visibility of your functions to as narrow of a scope as possible. So this is the public API for this class, and this is our private helper method. So with all this, again, this is all great stuff to use. This is all really great stuff to use unit testing for. So the reason we did all this is because we have our tracks fetcher here. And let's do a switch on our result. Remember, this can be either success or failure. So switch on result, case dot do failure first since it's easy. Oops. Let error. And if it's an error, we're just going to pass that through. So we're going to do completion handler result dot failure, and we're just going to pass along that error. Otherwise, remember this tracks fetcher is, we know we're getting back JSON, right? So we're going to say JSON there. And now we need to transform that JSON into tracks so that we can fulfill our promise and return an array of tracks. Right, so let tracks equal, and this is really nice and tight here, so now we have our tracks JSON transformer dot tracks from JSON. So we have an array of type any. We want an array of tracks, so this is perfect. Oh. Knows, okay, yep. we know it wasn't used yet, so now we're going to call our completion handler. And we're going to have success. And we're just going to pass back our tracks. All right, now we can go back and update our view controller. And again, we have this result pattern. So we can say switch results. Oops. We'll do failure again first. And for now, we're not really handling it, so we'll just say print error.description. Tracks. Now, this no longer has to be an array of tracks. Just as the dictionary, we can make this our model type, which is an array of track. And we can say self.tracks append contents of tracks. All right, so now we have our model being an array of tracks. Okay, whatever. And tracks. There we go. Now, down here, this doesn't necessarily know how to work with tracks because this is these are all using the dictionary again. So, but look how much simpler this is. We can say track. Okay, yeah. So our track so instead of a track info here, we're just going to say our track, and let's just comment out this stuff for a second. Now we can just say track dot name. Value of type track equals tracks. So index path dot row. Oh. Had an array of, okay, that was weird. Okay, that was just a mistake. Track.name, track.artist name, and track.collection name. Right. And contents of sequence, tracks. Yeah, there we go. All right. So everything is not yet good here, but we are in much better shape. Let's take a look. Okay, why did that not work? Architecture Basics track error 1. Track. Okay, let's see where track error is. Oh, crap. Never fixed this. There we go. Oh, wait, okay, I know what's happening here. Tracks table view controller. Here's the difference. Before, we were keeping this call alive by calling the shared implementation of the NSURL session, but this is going out of scope as soon as view did load is finished. So that's not going to work. So we need a way to hold on to this. And probably the best way to do that is either we can make it on a button click, or we can make an instance of it. So maybe we'll do that real quick. Track. Glad I caught this today before I do this exercise tonight. So we can make track fetcher a struct, and we will make this not a static method. Let track fetcher equal and then all we have to do is tracks fetcher. Oh, also, what did we not do? We didn't reload our table view. All right. So we need to call self because we're in a closure. Table view reload data. So now what we're doing is we're creating an instance of tracks fetcher, and we are fetching all the tracks from our instance as opposed to a static method, and we're calling reload data on the table view. Right, we're still on a background thread. Okay, so there's a couple different options of the way we can handle that. I personally like to have my networking methods, my track fetcher, call the main thread so that my UI code doesn't even have to worry about it. And it's always kind of a debate as to whether to do it in the JSON service, or I guess this is the best place to do it only because mainly because we know we're on a background thread here, and not all the implementations of track fetcher are going to necessarily be on a background thread. So let's do that. Okay, so here, okay, so here we're calling the main thread, and we're going to put all of this code here, so no matter what, we're going to be on the main thread by the time we get back to the UI. So let's see if that fixed anything. Great. So we know that the image stuff isn't working because we haven't gotten to refactoring that yet, but all the text stuff is coming back. So let's quickly review what we've done and what we have left to do. We refactored all of the networking code from the view controller where it did not belong, and we put it into the separate classes of the sort of are following the separation of responsibilities, right? So all the view controller cares about is getting back tracks. It doesn't care if it's from JSON or if it's from the network or wherever. It trusts that the tracks fetcher knows where to get them from. The tracks fetcher doesn't really, I mean, it might be fetching tracks from all over the place. So we don't want to be embedding a bunch of domain-specific stuff into this class either. We just want to say, okay, get it from the JSON service, or get it from the XML service, or get it from local storage. And we're going to trust the tracks JSON service knows how to do that. So we're going to have our fetch all here. Here's where we have all the domain, or the business logic of what the URL is, what the error types are, how to pull out the results properly from the JSON. And then our tracks fetcher sort of either passes along the error or it calls on a helper method to transform that JSON into tracks. Okay, let's see what we have left to do. Probably the biggest thing, well, first of all, we want to get the image working again. We want that to be on a background thread. I usually just do something like AF Networking's image view extension. That's a really great way to do it. Also, we don't want the view controller to be drawing the cells views for it, right? So I'll quickly just stub out how I would do that. And you guys can do this. This is pretty simple. The way I normally do my view controller cells is I have a public method, which is called configure. Doesn't return anything. And usually it takes the model object of what it's trying to configure. So it's going to take with track. And then now at this point, the cell knows how to draw itself. So we can just be like album collection name label dot text equals track dot collection name, etc. And then back in our table view controller, we can get rid of all this domain logic. And since we've casted it, we should probably not make that a, well, whatever. That, in my opinion, that is okay. Because if this force cast is okay, because if it's not a track table view cell, you're in some weird state and you probably are okay to crash anyways. So the way all you have to do now is you take your cell dot configure. Gotta command B this sucker. Cell dot configure with track, and we have our track already. And now all of that cell, how to draw a cell logic is now put to the right level, which is at the level of the cell. And that's it. So feeling pretty good about my talk tonight, and I'd love to hear any feedback or any questions. Thank you very much.